In Colombia, the mayor of Medellin called for a sit-in protest after his suspension and that of his counterpart in the municipality of Ibagué for allegedly participating in improper political activities. In Ecuador, teachers were on a hunger strike for 9 consecutive days to demand wage equalization and the implementation of the organic law on intercultural education. The world condemns the murder of Palestinian Al Jazeera journalist by Israeli occupation forces while covering a day of repression in the occupied territories. Hi, this is From the South. I am your news anchor, Diego Martin, from the Telstar studios in Havana. We begin with the news. In Colombia, the mayor of Medellin called for a sit-in protest after his suspension and that of his counterpart in the municipality of Ibagué. The mayor of Medellin, Daniel Quintero, called for a sit-in protest after the decision of the Attorney General of the nation to suspend him and the mayor of Ibagué, Daniel Hurtado, to be investigated and determine their alleged responsibility for improper activities in politics. Quintero pointed out that the Attorney General has violated his political rights, describing this decision as a coup d'état. The public call has received messages of support from citizens who endorse Quintero's administration and some militants, elected congresspeople, and members of the Historical Pact campaign, a group for which the mayor has been showing his support for several months now. Venezuela's oil minister Tarek al-Aissami ratified Wednesday the country's commitment to continue working towards a balanced oil market. The minister said that OPEC will play an important role in the coming years and that Venezuela will continue working with the OPEC Plus alliance. The statement was made during a meeting with the forces and actors of the oil industry held in Caracas. Al-Aissami also recognized the role of the Secretary General of the organization, Mohamed Barkindo, in the development and strengthening of the organization, and pointed out that his work as head of the Secretariat of the organization helped in the rebalancing of the world economy. The minister assured that it was necessary to bet on a model of relations that guarantees the respect for the sovereignty of the peoples.
To bet on an exemplary model of bilateral and multilateral relations, forcing us to make this relationship and this organization successful as a model so that the other peoples of the world and the other countries know that exemplary relations can coexist, relations of brotherhood within the framework of respect for the sovereignty of peoples, self-determination, and above all, betting on pluricentric and multipolar world.
OPEC's Secretary General Mohamed Barkindo recognized Venezuela's leadership in the midst of the severe unilateral sanctions imposed by the United States and its allies against the Latin American nation.
Your Excellency, you have made wonders in this great country when you are slapped with the most severe sanctions seen in modern times, almost a blockade, and you are able to provide leadership.
In Uruguay, groups of students and teachers mobilized against the new educational training plans promoted by the government of President Luis Lacalle Pou. Students of the Teachers Institute of Artigas carried out a mobilization in front of the headquarters of the National Administration of Public Education. The groups demanded to be received by the authorities in order to show their rejection to the initiative of the Uruguayan president, besides demanding a larger budget at the end of the persecution against the student organizations.
Mainly against the reform of university degrees, but also demanding better study conditions in both centers. There are many problems regarding the lack of teachers, the lack of classrooms, overcrowding, and in our case, there is a problem with the issue of practices. There are no vacancies. Always the same thing happens. Teachers are not paid, things that clearly respond to a cut, to the abandonment of education training, and we are on strike since last Friday, and today we decided to mobilize to be heard here.
Honduran President Xiomara Castro said that all Latin American and the Caribbean nations should be present at all summits in the region. The president said on Twitter that if all nations are not present, it is not a summit of the Americas, referring to the politician José Cecilio del Valle's quote, "The most worthy study of an American is America." In Haiti, the National Network for the Defense of Human Rights denounced that the death toll from gang violence in the north of the capital, Port-au-Prince, increased to 148. The organization pointed out that in only 4 communes, 95 murders were registered in only 3 weeks, and highlighted that the government and the security forces have not taken any action. In addition, data reveals that the number of victims could be higher due to the fact that the corpses are incinerated or buried in mass graves. The network claims that for 2 weeks, the 400 Mawozo and Chen Mishan gangs clashed in the north of the capital. During the confrontation, the criminals beheaded people, set fire to houses and vehicles, and this caused forced displacements in the territory. Rescuers and firefighters in Havana, Cuba, continue the search and rescue operations after the blast that destroyed the Saratoga Hotel last Friday, May 6th. 5 days after the accident, the rescue brigades, together with other specialized forces, are still working without interruption searching for 2 persons still missing after the explosion. 43 people have been reported dead in the accident so far and 97 injured, of which 16 are still hospitalized. Meanwhile, repair and reconstruction works are underway in the neighboring areas. We're going to take a short break now. Please join us again after this. Hi, and welcome back to From the South. In Ecuador, teachers of the public education system have been on hunger strike for 9 days to protest against reforms to the organic education law. The Constitutional Court summoned for Thursday, May 12th, a public hearing prior to issuing the new ruling. Meanwhile, the strikers warned that they will maintain their decision not to eat food until the decision of the court is issued. They also warned that if the decision is not favorable, the action will be extended to other cities in the country. The protest began on May 3rd to demand a decision by the Constitutional Court on the reforms to the organic law of intercultural education approved by the National Assembly and against the presidential veto to the regulation. The law includes a salary increase for teachers and the payment of retirement incentives, among other benefits. And we remain in Ecuador as new acts of violence were reported in a prison in the town of Santo Domingo de los Achilas. Local authorities alerted about a new riot in the penitentiary center of the number 1 of the locality. Officially stressed that the situation was controlled later. Through a statement, they pointed out that the police and military forces carried out operations and controls in all the wards of the prison to safeguard the lives of the prisoners. In this sense, let us remember that a day ago a similar event took place in the same prison where at least 44 people died. In Guatemala, indigenous movements demonstrated in rejection of the law for the rescue of pre-Hispanic heritage, which proposes state intervention in archaeological and sacred sites. The ancestral spiritual guides were received by parliamentarians of the Huenac indigenous political movement, who expressed their rejection to the bill. In this sense, Congresswoman Sonia Raguay pointed out that the commercialization of historical sites for tourist purposes, as proposed by the law, only seeks to exploit the resources and ceremonial sites, in addition to exterminate the culture. Likewise, Congressman Edgar Batres also emphasized that the opposition to the so-called Initiative 5923 is a response to more than 500 years of subjugation of the native peoples. The local authorities of the Ukrainian region of Kherson asked the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, to annex the territory. Annex the territory of the Eurasian nation. Meanwhile, the Kremlin claims the right of that population to decide on its own destiny. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov pointed out that the inhabitants of the Kherson province should be the ones to determine their own future. The Russian official stressed that this issue has to be thoroughly evaluated by law experts. He stressed that said decisions are crucial and must have an absolutely clear legal basis and legitimate grounds, as in the case of Crimea. Earlier, the authorities of Kherson announced their intention to ask the Russian government for the annexation of the province located in the south of Ukraine. Russian energy company Gazprom announced the reduction of gas pumping to Europe through Ukraine. The Russian consortium said fuel transit to Europe through Ukrainian territory will be of 72 million cubic meters instead of the 95.8 million supplied the day before. They noted that there are no obstacles to continue to work in the usual way, assuring that the company fully complies with all its obligations to European consumers. In this regard, the Russian state company rejected the proposal to change the supply route from the Soranovka metering station to the Zhucha station, the latter being under Ukraine's control. Many European countries have seen record high inflation rates and soaring prices as backfire fueled by Western sanctions on Russia amid the Ukrainian crisis. Denmark's inflation hit a near four-decade high in April as energy and food prices increased drastically, official figures showed on Tuesday. Meanwhile, Greek inflation rose 10.2% year-on-year in April, the highest rate since 1994, according to official figures. Keith Anderson, chief executive officer at Scottish Power, warned that the energy bills of British families could hit nearly £3,000 in October, and 10 million homes will be unable to afford heating this winter, according to a news report by the Daily Mail on Monday. The London Fire Department also said on Monday that the United Kingdom has recently seen a surge in fire accidents as some residents tried to save money by burning wood for heating. Inflation in the United States, however, slowed down in April after 7 months of relentless gains, a tentative sign that price increases may be peaking while still imposing a financial strain on American households. The Labor Department said Wednesday that consumer prices jumped 8.3% last month in relation to a year before and was below the 8.5% year-over-year surge in March, which was the highest rate since 1981. Food banks across the U.S. say these economic conditions are pushing demands for their support higher at a time when their labor and delivery costs are climbing and donations are decreasing. The problem has grown to the point that last week President Joe Biden called for a conference on hunger, nutrition, and health in September, the first since 1969.
People before me worked till they almost died. And I wanted to be able to retire and just have a little bit of enjoyment. So I retired at 67, and I was pretty nervous to do that because when you're giving up your source of income, go down to a quarter of what you originally had, it can give you some sleepless nights.
So as food prices are higher, as more people are in need of our services, we're seeing decreases in some places that are really impacting us too, like decreased donations. A majority of our members are seeing a decrease in donations, decrease in government supplied commodities at a time when we need it the most, and decrease in retail and manufacturing donations too. So it's a perfect storm.
On Wednesday, United States Senate failed to secure a bill that would guarantee women's abortion rights. The draft was outvoted 51-49, which means the bill would not become a federal law. The draft, titled Women's Health Protection Act, was introduced after a leaked Supreme Court draft intended to overturn Roe v. Wade, jeopardizing about 50 years of constitutional rights to a legal and safe abortion. Polls have shown that an overwhelming majority of voters don't want to see the Supreme Court overturn the 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling that protected abortion rights, which could be a major issue in November's crucial midterm elections. On early May, a leak of a Supreme Court draft overruling Roe v. Wade caused mass outrage and protests of pro-choice activists and women in general. We have more news coming up after a final short break. Please stay with us. Hi, and welcome back. On Wednesday, a senior United Nations diplomat condemned the killing of veteran Al Jazeera journalist Shirin Abu Akleh in Palestine. Tor Wennesland, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, sent his deepest condolences to the reporter's family and called for an immediate and thorough investigation and for those responsible to be held accountable. Farhan Haq, the deputy spokesman for the United Nations Secretary General, told reporters. Abu Akleh was one of Al Jazeera's best-known reporters. She was shot and killed on Wednesday while covering an Israeli military raid in the occupied Palestine. Abu Akleh, at age 51, was a respected face in the Middle East, known for her coverage on Al Jazeera Arabic of the harsh realities of Israel's open-ended military occupation of the Palestinians. She was also a U.S. citizen.
Coordinator for the Middle East peace process strongly condemned the killing of Al Jazeera's reporter Shireen Abu Akleh, who was shot with live fire this morning while covering an Israeli operation in Jenin in the occupied West Bank. He sent his deepest condolences to her family and wished a speedy recovery to her fellow journalist who was injured in the incident. Mr. Venesland called for an immediate and thorough investigation and for those responsible to be held accountable. Media workers should never be targeted, he said.
In Egypt, the Arab League condemned the murder of Al Jazeera journalist during a crackdown by Israeli occupation forces in Palestine. The League of Arab States indicated that they condemned the assassination of Shireen Abu Akleh in Palestine by alleged gunfire from Israeli forces. The League in a statement stressed that they condemned the assassinations of journalists, emphasizing that these are crimes against the freedom of expression and the media, while demanding an exhaustive investigation into the journalist's murder. In this sense, they attributed responsibility for the accident to the Israeli authorities and demanded that the perpetrators be punished. Moreover, dozens protested after the killing of Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh by the Israeli forces while she was covering an Israeli military raid in the northern occupied West Bank city of Jenin. Protesters were holding Palestinian flags, posters with photos of the veteran Al Jazeera journalist. Abu Akleh died of a gunshot to the head while doing her job. The broadcaster and two reporters who were with her blamed Israeli forces. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Saeed Khatibzadeh was strongly condemned the deliberate targeting of Shireen Abu Akleh. Thus, the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman described this criminal act by the Zionist regime as clear proof of the regime's lack of commitment to the role and place of the press, the media, and journalists in promoting awareness for the public opinion. Likewise, the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations, Riyad Mansour, says that Arab countries at the United Nations called for an independent international probe into what they called the assassination of Al Jazeera's journalist. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Felix Plasencia expressed his condolences over the murder of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh by the Israeli occupation forces. The high government official wrote on Twitter, quote-unquote, "We send our condolences and respect to the family, friends, and co-workers of Shireen Abu Akleh for this unjustified and painful loss. We reaffirm our unwavering commitment and support for the dissemination of the truth of our people's and Palestinian cause." And on that topic, Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez also condemned the murder of the journalist of Al Jazeera, Shireen Abu Akleh, and also expressed his condolences to family and friends. Rodriguez wrote on Twitter, quote-unquote, "We condemn the cowardly murder of prominent Al Jazeera journalist by Israeli forces. Shireen's death will now prevent the world from learning about the crimes committed against the Palestinians. Our condolences to the family and friends." Now, on Wednesday, the United Nations was seeking $144 million in U.S. currency needed to fund the salvage operation of a decaying tanker full of oil moored off the coast of Yemen. The pledging conference, co-hosted by the United Nations and the Netherlands, comes more than 2 months after the United Nations and Yemen's Houthi rebels reached an agreement to transfer the tanker's content to another vessel. Secretary General Antonio Guterres appealed for funds to implement the plan with the United Nations reached with the Houthis to avert a disaster that could also disrupt traffic through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. The Houthis control Yemen's western Red Sea ports, including Ras Isa, 6 kilometers from where the FSO say were moored since the 1980s. The Houthis criticized the United Nations for allegedly not presenting an operational plan to maintain the tanker, a statement that could complicate UN efforts to raise funds. Sri Lanka's President Gotabaya Rajapaksa pledged to give up most of his executive powers but stopped short of yielding to demands for his resignation over the country's economic crisis. In his first address to the nation since the beginning of a month-long protest campaign calling on him to quit, he said he will announce a unity government in the coming days. Sri Lanka has suffered through months of lengthy blackouts and shortages of food, fuel, and other vital goods after running out of foreign exchange to pay for imports. The island nation's central bank chief warned that the economy will collapse unless a new government is urgently appointed. Security forces curbed public disorders after a huge troop deployment with soldiers ordered to shoot on sight at anyone engaged in looting or violence.
This week, I will appoint a Prime Minister who commands the majority in Parliament and can secure the confidence of the people and the Cabinet of Ministers. I request the assistance in maintaining the state machinery uninterrupted to protect the lives of the people as well as their property, and to provide the essentials to the people without allowing the country to collapse at this critical juncture.
With that, we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at Telstar English. You can also join us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telstar English, I am Dio Martin. Thank you for watching.